Salam, Tanastaling, Samay Kamal Grimes, Ibalalo, Amerikawi Nen, Gen Afrikawi Nen, Afrikawi Nen, Tanisha Marinya, Inagralo, Ikrita, Betam Ikrita, I'm a little nervous. Gen Zare Liu Kenno, and Zare Teru Kenno. Ethiopia Hagarachin no. The victory of Adwa is the victory of all African people. Arat Guzoch, Ethiopia Ihejalo, Wust Ethiopia Amarinya Atanalo, and Inglizenya Kwankwa Astamralo. Yeah, Ethiopia Tariq and Bahrawi Betam Tenkara no, and Betam Regim no, Tariq Betam Regim no, Ahun Desalegn. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you all for having me. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I wanted to at least introduce myself, speaking the little Amharic that I know, just as an effort to bridge the gap between the different communities, because everything is captured in language. I think I was supposed to go on a little bit earlier, but I think some things were lost in translation. So I'm here, I have a presentation. My presentation is on the impact of the Battle of Adwa on the African diaspora. So I'm gonna go over to this side now. So as I said, this presentation is on the impact of the Ethiopian victory at the Battle of Adwa on the African diaspora. And again, my name is Kamal Malik Grimes. I received my master's degree in African Studies and Research from Howard University in May 2019. And my thesis was about this topic, Ethiopian and African American relations through history. So, oh, thank you. So they're telling me I have 15 minutes instead of 20 minutes, so I'm going to be a little bit quicker. So before prior to the 1870s, most Europeans were unable to really penetrate deep into the interior of Africa for fear of death by malaria. But with the discovery of quinine and effective medicine against malaria, Europeans were able to begin colonizing Africa in a more substantial way. So in 1884 to 1885, Otto von Bismarck of Germany invited European nations, including the United States and the Ottoman Empire, for the Berlin Conference, which we talked about in the other presentation. Now, I want to give a little bit of background on a few concepts. So this concept of Ethiopianism, or I believe also in Amharic, Ethiopiawinet, in a sense, that might be a little bit different. But Ethiopianism, as I'm defining it here, is the symbolic and idyllic view of Ethiopia as an exalted nation and or Ethiopians as a special people with deep historical roots and a central strategic role to play in international geopolitics. This general romantic view of Ethiopia and Ethiopians can take a different form depending on which particular group are espousing the idea. So I broke it down into 4 different manifestations of Ethiopianism. One would be the Ethiopian manifestation, and these are some notes. It would come from being a citizen of the nation state that we know as of Ethiopia, a descendant and an heir to the mighty empire of Aksum, and descendants of Queen of Sheba as outlined in Kebra Nagast, and basically having that be one idea of Ethiopianism. Now, the African diaspora interpretation of Ethiopianism is very different. It comes mainly from Bible verses. During slavery times, we weren't really allowed to read, but we were able to some people were able to read the Bible, and they discovered the name Ethiopia in the Bible. So it was mentioned 41 times. And there's one verse particularly in the Bible that was very inspirational. Psalm 68:31, which says, "Princes shall come out of Egypt, and Ethiopia shall soon stretch forth her hands unto God, and our oppression will be over soon." And in the African diaspora view of Ethiopianism, Ethiopia is a metonym for the continent of Africa. So in other words, it's a representation of all of Africa. And Ethiopian is also a synonym to Negro or black. So then you have the continental African viewpoint, which Ethiopia was very inspirational in the independent church movements in Southern Africa, as well as the anti-colonial struggle, many people going there to be trained, and just looking at Ethiopia as a motivation and kind of admiring Ethiopia for being able to be sovereign. And then there's a European manifestation of Ethiopianism as well, where in the Middle Ages of Europe, there was a lot of mythology around the legend of Prester John. Some people may be familiar with that or not, but it was supposedly a mythical Christian kingdom in Africa or somewhere. They didn't know exactly where it was, but they were looking for it. And when the Portuguese finally got to Ethiopia in the 1500s, they said, "Oh, we think that we've actually found this ancient kingdom, this ancient Christian kingdom that can help us." Now, this is all background just to have the scope of what we're dealing with here. Now, going into the etymology of the word Ethiopia, there's three possibilities. You have a Greek, which most people that I've heard have said that Ethiopia comes from the word Ethiop, which is a combination of the Greek words ith, meaning burnt, and op, meaning faith. Simply put, Ethiopian is a burnt-faced or dark-skinned person. Then there's another origin, Ethiopic origin. In the book of Aksum, it states that Ethiopis is the son of the biblical Cush, who in turn is the son of Ham, who is the son of Noah. And there's been many myths about the curse of Ham, but we won't really get into that because I don't have the time. But and then there's Latin and Greek. It has been argued by some scholars that the word Ethiopian actually derives from the term, now I may pronounce this wrong, Ichthyophagi, referring to the fish-eating people of the African Red Sea coast. Now this was a term that was used during the Roman Empire. Now, just to give a state of the African diaspora in the African world during the Battle of Adwa, in 1804, or around that time, let's look at the century. In 1804, Haiti becomes the first successful enslaved African revolution to result in a sovereign nation. So Haiti was a symbol of black freedom for the world in the early 1800s. And Ethiopia became that symbol in 1896. And so they are kind of a parallel. You have the beginning of the century and the ending of the century. So 1865, United States abolishes slavery. In 1887, Marcus Messiah Garvey is born in Jamaica. This is also the last year of Reconstruction in the United States. So after slavery, there was a period called Reconstruction where they were trying to rebuild the country and unify after the country had already gone to war. And so many African Americans actually were elected into Congress. However, there was intense racism. The KKK and other terror groups were lynching black people and killing them because they saw the power of our vote. Within 20 years after slavery, we already had multiple congressmen, businessmen, and people were very jealous of that. So this is the context of the Battle of Adwa. If you remember from the previous presentation, the Adwa African victory, around this time, Emperor Johannes and Ras Alula, they're fighting, at the same time, they're fighting against the Egyptians and the Italians at the same time. So 1888, Brazil becomes the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery. Much later. 1896, the poet laureate Paul Laurence Dunbar writes the poem Ode to Ethiopia. And it'd be good for you all to look that poem up. And it was celebrating the victory at Adwa. So here in 1896, you have a tradition of African Americans who already have been focused on Ethiopia through the black church and through the Bible and through studies of classical literature, and now they're able to connect that with the victory at Adwa. So it becomes more of a dream to a reality. That's the point. If there's anything I can let you all take away from today, was the victory at Adwa made the dream of the prophecy of African redemption a reality. Because one of the first things they said, we learned Christianity in this country through slavery, and they said that we were slaves and that we would still be slaves in heaven, that we weren't in the Bible. So many different things, disparaging things were said about us. But when we discovered Ethiopia in the Bible is what kept our hope alive. And when Ethiopia actually won in the Battle of Adwa, it was confirmation that our prayers were not in vain. So 1900, you have the first Pan-African Conference convened by the Trinidadian Henry Sylvester Williams in 1900. And then 1900, W.E.B. Du Bois becomes first African American to get a PhD from Harvard. Now I'm gonna speed up a little bit more at this point. So the state of the okay, so I basically explained that part. Yeah. Okay, after the victory of Adwa, this bottom point here, this is very crucial. After the victory of Adwa, the racial identity of the Ethiopians became a matter of fierce debate between the white press and the black press in the United States. Because, as was stated earlier, it was a huge embarrassment for Europeans to be defeated by a black African country. And so they had to say that they're somewhat Caucasian, or they're not black. And so there was a big argument on that. But as we're here on February 29th, the last day of Black History Month, celebrating the victory of Adwa, I think all of those mythologies and different things can be put to rest finally. Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that clap. The response of now this is where it becomes a little bit interesting, and some history you may not know. The response to the Battle of Adwa by the African diaspora. So many, not many, but a few daring and adventurous African Americans who were able to make it to Ethiopia, they came. So the first was Benito Sylvian, who was a Haitian, and William Henry Ellis, who was an African American. They become some of the first African diasporans to enter Ethiopia, and they wanted to work with Menelik. Menelik at that time, the emperor, I'd say Menelik invites more African diasporans to come to Ethiopia. So some of the some early visitors and settlers included Dr. Joseph Vitalian, who was a medical doctor from Guadeloupe, one of the French Caribbean islands, and he actually founded the first hospital in Ethiopia and was the emperor's personal physician, Emperor Menelik II. He was affectionately known as Tikur Hakim, or the Black Doctor. Now, there was the first settler to Ethiopia, Daniel Robert Alexander. He was a missionary from the United States, but by way of the Caribbean. John West was a native of Washington, D.C., and a graduate of Howard University, also briefly served as the emperor's physician. And Benito Sylvian, who I mentioned earlier, he actually at the 1900 Pan-African Congress in London, he represented the interests of Ethiopia. He had spoken with the emperor, and because no one could be there, he was representing their interests. And so here you have the Haitian connection and the Ethiopian connection again. As we said, Haiti and Ethiopia have been two huge symbols of independence for African people. William Henry Ellis, here you see pictured William Henry Ellis of the United States, who actually negotiated the first diplomatic treaty between between Ethiopia and the United States. And there was a lot of controversy with that. I'll just briefly go into it. Originally, it was supposed to be a white American by the name of Skinner, but he actually on the way there, somehow he mysteriously died. On a ship, he didn't make it to Ethiopia. And so William Henry Ellis, who was on that trip, was part of that delegation who actually set up everything. He had already been to Ethiopia and set it up, but the United States didn't want to put him forward because he was black. But But because the white guy that they sent had passed away, he ended up actually being the one that delivered the treaty. Honestly, I think that's destiny. I'll just say that. He wasn't supposed to deliver it. Now, the first Ethiopian delegation to come to the Americas, this was a delegation that came in the year 1919. They visited New York City, Washington, D.C., and Chicago. Dejazmach Nado, Blatten Geta Hurui, Wolde Selassie, and Kantiba Gebru Desta, and Ato Sinkas. I know one of them was the mayor of Addis Ababa at the time. They actually, this 1919 in America was known as the Red Summer because it was the most lynchings, killings of black people, race riots. It was a very, very tumultuous time in this country. And so the U.S. was trying to shield the Ethiopians from racial embarrassment. And they were saying, even though that their skin is dark and their hair and some of their features are Negro, they're not Negroes. So we have to keep them away from them and make sure that there's no embarrassment. But they were actually refused service in one of National Democratic Club in New York, and on account of their color. So even though they tried to steer them away, they couldn't slip through the cracks because normally they had State Department people that are, chaperoning them from place to place, keeping them away so they don't discover what's really behind the scenes. But they actually reached out, and they did reach out to African Americans and met with some people and invited more to come and settle. Now, briefly, I'm going to try to hurry up. The African diaspora and repatriation. Here to the left is a picture of the Ford family, early African diaspora and repatriates to Ethiopia. Some may be familiar with Dr. Abbey Ford. He used to teach, yes, clap it up, yeah. The late, great Dr. Abbey Ford, whom I met when I was in Ethiopia and also met while I was at Howard. His family was pioneers. His father actually wrote the national anthem for Marcus Garvey's organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and that anthem was called Ethiopia, the Land of Our Fathers. And so they were leaders of a black Jewish group in New York, and they ended up repatriating to Ethiopia, they had that connection with the Beta Israel and to be in the land of the true. And he's very prominent. And then here, as a picture of myself, this is me in front of the Shashamane land grant to the Africans of the diaspora. Now, this land grant was given by Haile Selassie in 1955 to be administered by the Ethiopian World Federation. And it was given to the Africans of the diaspora because of our support of the Ethiopia's cause in the 1930s during the second Italian invasion. So I think more people know a little bit about the African-American involvement with the second Italian invasion versus the first Italian invasion. But the reason that is because there was a whole generation of people that had grown up hearing the stories of Adwa. I thought I had to. Okay, and this is just some of the books that a short, brief snippet of some of the books that I used for this study. This book was called Adwa, and its inspiration on decolonization, Pan-Africanism, and the struggle of black people, black political history from 1796 to 2007. The name of this author was Professor Kinfe Abraham. I only was able to find his book when I was in Ethiopia, and I didn't even find it online, so this book was a godsend. African American Reactions to War in Ethiopia by Joseph Harris. The Sons of Sheba's Race, African Americans in the Italo-Ethiopian War, which I actually bought in Silver Spring 7 years ago at the Ethiopian Heritage Festival. And that started me on my journey 7 years ago, so it's very fitting that I'm here giving this presentation. William Leo Hansberry, Pillars in Ethiopian History. Ethiopia and the Missing Link in African History by Sterling R. Means. These were two African Americans that wrote these books. The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire, and Drusilla Dungy Houston. Now this book, From David Walker to Barack Obama, Ethiopianists as Keepers of the African Dream, and Bond Without Blood, A History of Ethiopian and New World Black Relations. So, Batam and Amase Ganalan, and Malik Ken, enjoy the rest of your day.